Hello all and welcome back to another Hyp3rblue review. Today I'm going to tackle the cult classic game, Hyp3r. I've been asked about my opinion on Hyp3r from multiple people in the past, and especially once I covered Darkseid as much as I did. Hyp3r is a tough one though, not because the story is deeper than Darkseid 1 or 2, but because it was made to be intentionally ridiculous and over the top. Normally, I'd be all over something like this since I like things that are so bad that it's good. But Hyp3r doesn't fall into that category for me. I'll explain why that is in a little while. Also, if you've been following along with my Let's Play, then you may have heard how hard I've been on this game. I'll do my best to be impartial with this review. All that said, let me stop spoiling my rating and get to the meat and potatoes of the game. Hyp3r opens up with what most would describe as a nightmare, but I just call it any given night in the town of Harvest. The intro sequence ends with the amnesiac protagonist Steve being startled out of bed. Steve, who looks like he's such a kidder, can't remember who he is or even where he is. He asks his mother and his brother. Well, at least they say they're his family. Anyway, he asks them and they tell him he's in the town of Harvest and he's about to get married next week. This rightfully freaks him out. Not the waking up in a strange town with no memory, but the thought of getting married. Steve is what we would call a player character. Someone we, the players, would empathize with and or put ourselves into. He has no backstory, so we're going to go on this journey together. Players will be able to act out their own desires, given that Steve technically doesn't have any ties with the town, besides what is told to him. Players are pretty much given free rein on what to explore at first. There is a time limit to this game, but it isn't obvious or intuitive. You have an in-game week to become a member of the town's local secret society, the Order of the Harvest Moon. Being a member comes with certain perks, like not having to donate blood at the upcoming blood drive. They bleed you till it hurts.
What the hell are you doing?
I told you, if you were still in Harvest for the annual blood drive, you'd have to donate.
What's happening here? Have y'all lost your minds?
You have only so long to find yourself. After that, if you're still a stranger, you have no one to blame but yourself.
But how does Steve gain access to the lodge? Well, by doing a series of tasks to prove his worth. These start off as simple, such as vandalizing a car or stealing, but they eventually lead to worse crimes, such as full-blown arson. Steve is told that all the answers he seeks are in the lodge. Pertinent questions like who he is and what the fuck is wrong with these people.
Hello, Steve. Where's Loomis?
You'll be coming around the mountain if you come. Oh, that's it.
Loomis, damn you.
Wait, no. You pervert. No. No.
Straining up the mattress again. Folding up the towels.
Night Mouse! No!
You can never go back to quail.
What? You think you can get one of those at a swap meet?
That's what I thought. The kookaburras told me, but I wouldn't listen. They lie so much. But now my crust is golden brown. Can't you hear the timer ding?
What a thing to say to your mother. Was that an invitation now that your father is out of action? Maybe later, dear. Right now I have housework to do. Though you can watch if you want. Don't forget to put the papers out for Jimmy. You know how he gets.
Steve's fiancée is in a similar predicament to Steve. Her name is Stephanie, and she is also suffering from amnesia. She is confined to her room as punishment for supposedly fooling around with Steve. Neither of them remembers that, but it doesn't stop the two from engaging in sexy time throughout the game. Stephanie doesn't want Steve to join the lodge, not because she has feelings for him, but because there's something inherently evil with the place. But it sounds like she's just a little jealous that she can't join. Speaking of jealousy, Stephanie's father, Mr. Potsdam, also wants to get into the lodge. He can't seem to complete his tasks, so he lounges on his couch, longing for Steve's father's meat.
Well, next time you see him, be sure to tell him that I said hello. And tell him that I'm praying for his speedy recovery. And also, would you remind him about the meat? Especially about the meat.
The rest of the townsfolk are a mixture of people that either pressure Steve to get accepted into the lodge, or just there as filler. A few express desire to get into the lodge themselves. More on my thoughts about that in a bit. The game pretty much forces players to join the lodge, or face the blood drive at the end of the week, which, of course, is the end of poor Steve. The lodge is a hodgepodge of background assets that are combined to form a large building. There are 3 levels to ascend. To say they make less sense throughout would probably be the only way to describe this. There are a bunch of rooms designed to test initiates, while others are there just to pass through or fight something odd. Now, here's where I'm going to get into spoilers, so skip ahead if you plan on playing Harvester to discover the mysteries of Harvest. I'll use a Dancing Iceman gif here to denote when I'm talking about spoilers. So, when players reach the top of the lodge, they're met with the Sergeant-at-Arms. He kidnaps Stephanie, who was presumed dead in an earlier scene, and is forcing a choice on Steve. Murder Stephanie or marry Stephanie? Jeez, it's kind of extreme. Oh, I forgot the twist. Steve and Stephanie are inside of a simulation. Nothing in Harvest is real, and that's why everything is a little askew.
Everything in Harvest is just slightly askew.
Which is probably the most hyperbolic statement in the game. Slightly askew?
If an A-bomb hits, what good is it gonna do to duck and cover?
Yes, a great deal of pleasure. The wasp is a sensual being, not a laborer, hedonistic instead of industrial. Some think them quick to anger. In truth, they are easily swayed to ecstasy. They penetrate your flesh, and the muscular contractions in their thorax as they pump venom could be likened to the muscular contractions of ejaculation.
Hello, Sheriff. Mrs. Potsdam here. Steve took Stephanie's bones. Yes, he's right here. The sheriff says hello, Steve. He'll be coming by to pick you up.
I'm squirming.
Squeal for me, Porky.
Anyway, the real deal is that this simulation is designed to create serial killers. If you murder Stephanie, then you pass and can be released from the simulation. If you choose to marry Stephanie, Steve will be killed along with Stephanie. Of course, Harvester expects players to go the murder route, so that's the quote-unquote good ending of the game, I suppose. Steve performs a fatality that would make Sub-Zero jealous, and he's released into the world to murder, which he immediately does. Then he goes home and plays violent video games, because social commentary, I guess? The other ending just shows Steve and Stephanie living their lives out in Harvest, and then the plug is pulled by the simulation guys. So let's talk about the simulation aspect for a moment. I was originally planning to do a deep dive on this game to focus in on whether players can figure out the simulation aspect through clues in the game. I decided that would not make a good topic, so I'm going to talk about it here. My answer is no, not really. Here's my comprehensive list that I put together for foreshadowing. First, charity is seen as bad. Probably not a huge red flag, but it's telling players that Steve shouldn't help people. And that's made even more clear when Steve goes and helps, or potentially doesn't help, Edna's daughter. Second, the tasking from the lodge. The tasks from the lodge are supposed to be gateway crimes. The fact that stealing the barber pole and arson led to a death is supposed to give players a pause to assess the situation. Are they happy that happened, or sad? That's part of the simulation in my mind. The third thing is the ability to kill certain townsfolk without consequence. Granted, you can kill certain townsfolk and get away with it once you have a get-out-of-jail-free card. If you do this, then the sheriff will teasingly ask if Steve enjoyed it, further pointing to the simulation's goal. The fourth thing is the love of violence shown throughout the game. Players are told that violence will solve almost all the problems faced in Harvest, and this is especially true in the lodge. To further solidify this, the mother, at the beginning of the game, tells Steve that he will have to get used to slaughtering things. Granted, I think she's talking about the slaughterhouse, but that's besides the point. Blackmail is also big, and the game allows players to show the townsfolk's personal lives around a people, like the picture of the principal and the teacher. The fifth thing is kind of subtle. There's a TV station in the town that broadcasts violent television content. The station's name is WHAR, but I believe that this could be pronounced as War. If you watch the TV clip, Hank will tell Steve that the Native American being shot is, quote-unquote, the good part. This, again, is trying to normalize violence to the players. Here's another subtle nod. The name of the school is called Gein Memorial. This is obviously a nod toward Ed Gein, a murderer and potential serial killer known for fashioning things from human bones and flesh. If that's not a nod toward the simulation, then I honestly don't know what is. The principal also mentions how great the man was, so again, they're idolizing a killer. One last thing I'll mention, which it's kind of a extra thing. The game has a password system that allows players to unlock all items and weapons, and also access certain parts of the lodge. Most of the password codes are names of infamous killers, or related to said killers. I don't know if one can technically infer anything from that since it isn't technically part of the story, but I thought I would mention it for the sake of completeness. Again, in my mind, that's not enough for a deep dive. I know I did something similar for Deliriant, but I'd rather do something different for this game. So, I'm working on another topic. I'll hopefully have something by next year, but we'll see. The problem is that this game is all over the place, and certain things characters say or do contradict other things that characters say or do. And sometimes things characters say contradict the same character. What I'm trying to say is, Harvester is kind of a mess. Alright, no more spoilers. So, Harvester is a weird game. It seems that it was made with the intention of capitalizing on violent video games, which were a big topic in the news at the time. Given the creators went with such extreme graphics to possibly try to justify that violent games can cause violence is honestly weird to me. The game rewards players for violence, as evidenced in the quote-unquote good ending that I mentioned before. It's less a social commentary than a cash grab, and it really does show in my mind. Harvester is more of a good idea on paper game, at least with how it's presented. The gameplay is so basic that it won't take players much effort to solve puzzles, and the twist is presented in such a lackluster way that the reveal doesn't really land as well as it should. Speaking of gameplay, since I didn't touch on it yet, Harvester uses traditional point-and-click adventure mechanics, but with a twist. There's combat in Harvester. Combat is performed by right-clicking on the mouse. If Steve is lined up perfectly, and trust me, I had trouble lining him up perfectly, he will attack the townsfolk. Anyway, back to my thoughts on the game. One thing I'll mention about Harvester is that it's very boring to me. There's too much dialogue and characters that don't impact the story. For a game that touts itself as a comedy, it's rarely funny and the humor falls flat. The puzzles are too simplistic and normally follow the same pattern. That is, find an item, present it to an NPC, progress the story. The puzzles in the beginning section are not that difficult, and the ones in the later section aren't any more difficult because they are hindered by poor level design. Speaking of poor design, the gameplay. The pointing and clicking aspect is fine, but the fighting mechanic is busted at best and terrible at its worst. The hitboxes on the NPCs need to be pixel perfect. Like I mentioned before, you have to line Steve up in the correct spot, or else he won't hit his target. Another thing that's kind of a miss for me, the game is just too open world sandboxy for its own good, and I think that is a downfall of the game. I mean, why do I want to talk to all of the weirdos all over the town if they don't progress the plot any? I'll leave you though with the most uninspired gameplay / puzzle mechanic in the game, and one of the most infuriating NPCs to talk to, Jimmy James. Old Jim Jim, as I like to call him. Players need to give him the paper every in-game day, or they will face his wrath. That's right, there's a puzzle mechanic where you have to take an item from one screen and give it to someone on the next screen. And then you have to listen to him talk, and trust me, not the best actor. The whole thing just doesn't make sense to me. Going back to the twist ending, and no worries, no spoilers, but in a better game, the twist ending would be presented subtly throughout the game. The player character, Steve, should show growth in one way or the other, depending on the choices he makes. Since players have to perform certain tasks to get into the lodge, give Steve traits of growing as a good guy or a bad guy. Granted, there are dialogue options for this, but it doesn't add anything to the game. Steve still presents himself the same whether or not he's murdered anyone in the town or not. It could have just used a little more work. Now, a lot of people like to compare Harvester to Darkseid 1 and 2, and I'm sure people will get confused as to why I'm quick to praise Darkseid 1 and 2 over Harvester. Well, in my opinion, Darkseid 1 is an interesting game with interesting gameplay mechanics. The protagonist is goofy, and that makes the whole situation work.
The battery still works.
Darkseid 2 is simply so bad it's good.
I don't think Ick and Uck are going to molest me anymore.
The puzzles aren't necessarily more complicated than Harvester, but the dialogue is so damn funny that it propels the game to cult classic status. Harvester really isn't that funny, and the gameplay is boring. Like I just said, Darkseid 2 is a so bad it's good game, but Harvester just doesn't fit that genre for me. In my opinion, so bad it's good is reserved for a story that someone thought was good, but wasn't, not one that is intentionally bad from the start. So at the end of the day, Harvester is a unique idea, but poor execution. The story is all over the place, and it doesn't make sense. The gameplay and puzzles are uninspired, and the game itself is just unfunny and really boring to me. It has the potential to be something good, it just needed better direction. I'll still contend that Harvester is a cult classic, and that I think that people should at least watch a Let's Play at the very least. That said though, I give Harvester 2 violent twist endings out of 5. I do still plan on making a deep dive on Harvester, I just don't have it fully fleshed out yet. In any case, I hope you enjoyed today's review. As always, thank you for watching. Hey y'all, I have some big news. The latest Tales of Hyperia the Crimson Knight demo has been officially released. Relive the magic of classic gaming with this new retro-inspired JRPG demo designed for the Game Boy. Immerse yourself in unique pixel art, an epic quest, and turn-based battles that harken back to the golden age of RPGs. Check out the link in the description to play the demo.